You can probably tell I'm walking faster. I have long legs. Friends, our next speaker is His Excellency, Cardinal Blase Cupich. Thank you. He was appointed by Pope Francis in 2014 as the 9th Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and he has been a member of the College of Cardinals since 2016. He is an appointee to the Congregation for Bishops and the Congregation for Catholic Education. He also serves on various committees, including the National Dialogue Initiative with Muslims, the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism, and the Ecumenical Interaffairs Committee. Please join me in welcoming Cardinal Cupich. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I want to tell you how grateful I am to the Board of the Parliament of World Religions for inviting me to be with you here this evening. But it is true also that we gather tonight under a pall of grief over last Saturday's horrific shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In face of such evil, we draw on our traditions to call forth healing for the victims and their families, innocents who found themselves caught up in madness as they gathered in their sanctuary to honor the Sabbath and rejoice in the naming of an infant. People of all faiths and none are joining together in solidarity around the world to condemn in the strongest terms this anti-Semitic act of depravity, along with the rhetoric, heartlessness, and apathy that have allowed hatred to flourish. It is this drive toward greater global awareness and cooperation that marked the era in which the Parliament of World Religions first met in Chicago in 1893. The same year, the Windy City, as we call Chicago, hosted the World's Columbian Exposition. Chicago was awakening as an international city, and the reality of modern globalization was emerging. The entire world was beginning to interact more intentionally and systematically, and has continued to do so on a number of levels related to trade and technology, migration, culture, religion, politics, and most recently, the environment. The irony is that in our time, when the world is more connected, interactive, cooperative on a number of levels, it is also more disconnected and divided, as so many find themselves excluded. I heard a great deal about this from the young people who participated in the recent Synod on Young People in Rome, a meeting of the world's Catholic bishops, religious, and lay people who gathered to discuss issues facing young people today. Those especially from developing countries spoke prophetically about an adult world that turns away refugees and migrants fleeing poverty and violence, which robs natural resources from countries to maintain their power, protection, and privilege. An adult world which profits from a regime of arms trafficking that destabilizes societies and turns children into soldiers. An adult world which engineers and pursues economic policies that marginalize a majority of the world's population, and which is quick to use war to settle conflicts, and which cares so little about the kind of planet we're going to leave future generations, as long as their comforts are met and while their profits increase. This is what I've heard from young people. Tonight, I want to touch on 3 areas in which I believe that world religions leaders have much to say to these young people, and more importantly, has much to say to the adult world. And the 3 areas that I'm going to address are the economy, the environment, and politics. And I'm going to rely on the insights of my own Christian tradition as found in Catholic social teaching. The economy. In one of the foundational texts of Catholic social teaching, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of labor, Pope Leo XIII offers this prescient observation. By degrees it has come to pass that working men and women have been surrendered, isolated, and helpless in the hard-heartedness of employers and the greed of unchecked competition. Leo XIII wrote these words just a couple of years before this body met for the first time in Chicago. And while we are a far cry from the exploitive practices of past centuries, there is no doubt that with the increase of wealth disparity worldwide, workers continue to have their dignity effaced, and lives are threatened by, as what Pope Francis calls, an economy that kills. Catholic social teaching makes clear that free markets need to be structured to contribute to the common good. Thus, an economy that measures national growth by profits alone, that promotes policies that maximize the freedom of markets and individual choice, and that believes that market forces left to themselves are the best, indeed the only, arbiters of economic progress, will always threaten human dignity. In its place, a consistent ethic of solidarity argues that inclusion and economic security for all must be the measures of economic health and the criterion for economic decision-making. This is not to say that Catholic social teaching denies the important role that free markets play in the creation of wealth and jobs, the advancement of human dignity, but it is an authentic solidarity that produces the social market economy that involves, as Pope Francis has noted, passing from a liquid economy directed at revenues, profiting from speculation and lending at interest, to one that invests in people, creating jobs, providing training. Moreover, the principle of freedom in a free market economy must be properly understood. Rather than springing from a libertarian ideology, it must, as Pope John Paul II noted in Centesimus Annus, promote human freedom in its totality. What this means is that the dignity of the human person is the measure of every system and institution. And it also means that the moral worth of a market economy must be evaluated by that principle of human dignity. The environment. Laudato Si, Pope Francis' moving summons to all people to care for the earth, our common home, is forthright in acknowledging the achievements of human ingenuity. Technology, the Pope writes, has remedied countless evils which used to harm and limit human beings. How can we not feel gratitude and appreciation for this progress, especially in the fields of medicine, engineering, and communication, he observes. Yet technology is not enough. It reaches its limits. When the Pope notes, it tends to absorb everything into its ironclad logic. And those who are surrounded with technology know full well that it moves forward in the final analysis neither for profit nor for the well-being of the human race. That in the most radical sense of the term, power is its motive, the lordship of all. It is this ethos of domination that is at the root of the environmental crisis that we face. The technocratic paradigm, as Pope Francis names it, denies even the most compelling signs that the deterioration of the planet is real and that humans significantly cause it. Instead, this paradigm holds that whatever environmental issues we may face can be solved by technology sooner or later. And later may be too late. But this mindset not only puts our common home in peril, as it ignores the exhaustibility of the Earth's resources, but it advances a bankrupt and one-dimensional vision of human happiness and flourishing. Pope Francis responds to the threat of the technocratic paradigm by recalling the truths founded in many religious traditions, that we are to approach creation with a sense of awe and wonder, committing ourselves to be the stewards, the servants of our common home, rather than its masters. He proposes an integral ecology as a remedy for this technocratic globalization. Since everything is closely interrelated and today's problems call for a vision capable of taking into account every aspect of global crisis, I suggest, he says, that we now consider some elements of an integral ecology, one which clearly respects its human and social dimensions. This means that pursuing an interdependence that obliges us to think of one world with a common plan. Politics. We see on the rise today a populism that masquerades as patriotism. In his letter to the people of Poland shortly after his election as Pope, John Paul II said, "Love of our motherland unites us and must unite us above all the differences. But this has nothing to do with narrow nationalism and chauvinism." How powerfully these words ring today, as we witness depraved words and acts of violence directed against refugees, the migrant, the other, the very people our traditions call us to love. And while love of country is a virtue in our traditions, it should never be mistaken for a nationalistic spirit that's fueled by fear and feelings of being aggrieved or dispossession, which moves a nation's citizens to embrace isolationism and discrimination. We are seeing that kind of spirit play out in a number of areas, most especially when it comes to migration. As countries adopt exclusionary and nativistic policies, and these policies lend legitimacy to corrosive language that demeans the poor, the vulnerable, who are doing nothing different from our ancestors who left their homelands seeking a better life for their families. As Pope Francis urges in Laudato Si', we need to strengthen the conviction that we are one single human family. There are no frontiers or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide. Still less is there room for the globalization of indifference. It should be clear by now that there are many dimensions to globalization. Of course, the primary dimension in the minds of most people is economic globalization. But there is also a globalization of communication, of war, the weapons development, of culture and entertainment, even of religion. In the face of all of this, what should religious leaders do? It seems to me, in conclusion, that we must be ready and willing to point out the connection that binds us all together. Religious leaders are uniquely poised to build awareness about those who have been disconnected, whether by misfortune or bigotry, unchecked market forces. I take courage from the words of Pope Francis, who reminds us that there are many in the world today who are ready and, yes, even eager to hear the voices of religious leaders speak for the young people that I met in the Synod and so many others who feel left out and forgotten. The majority of people living on our planet profess to be believers, he said. This should spur religions to dialogue among themselves for the sake of protecting nature, defending the poor, and building networks of respect and fraternity. My hope is that we will take up this work with fresh energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Cardinal. Thank you, Cardinal. We have to go down, please. Thank you.